right from the website itself. Okay. I'm also going to show you a video down as well down the line on the importance and understanding that not all houses are unique in itself, you know, the characteristics of it. So let's dive into your duties, right? In a transaction. What are your duties? Well, your duties is your fiduciary responsibility to protect the client, right? We always preach it, we always indicate it, we always tell you your job is to take care of your client's best interest, right? Best interest. The duties to be honest to all buyers and sellers. That's what we call the principles. When we say principles, we're referring to buyers, sellers, investors, and developers. Anyone that you're in a relationship, and more so you're going into a contract, a transaction. So those are your principles, okay? So what is your job? To protect your client's best interests. And here's the big picture that we see a lot, is that a lot of agents do not take care of their client's best interests. And this is where there's a gap, and now the buyer or the seller decide you may not be the right fit or the right person, and they decide not to work with you. That's when you may potentially lose a commission because you did not connect at the highest level with your client. How does your responsibility impact the disclosures of estimates of square footage, lot size, and boundaries? Okay, are all lot size the same? The answer is no. They're unique. Some are rectangular, some are more of a square, depending on the size, right? Some may be a configuration that it's thinner in the back than in the front, or vice versa. It may be thinner in the front, wider or shorter than it is in the back. All properties are unique in itself. But how do we promote it on the multiple listing service, right? Listing advertisements, disclosures are known as estimates and always should be included. One, where the source of that information? Where did you get this information that says that the property square footage is 2,500? Where did you get this information where it says the lot size is 8,500? Where did you get this information that the property was built in 1975? Okay. So you really got to understand the dynamics and your responsibility, the resources that you have is asking the right questions, right? You can ask the seller, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you know, what's the square footage of your property? Well, the seller may say, you know what, I don't know. I've owned this property for 40 years. I think it's 2,100. Is that a reliable source? Well, it depends. It really depends. If we don't have any other data that can verify the source of where we're getting, then we have to rely on the seller's answer. Also, number two, do you have not verified that information? So, you know, in essence, it's a combination of many variables. You know, you can go to the tax assessors, you can go and do a history search of the multiple listing service. You can ask the seller, you can do a property profile. Excuse me, you can call title and ask for a preliminary title report and see if the information pops up on that. So there's many resources that can get you the information. And if you still cannot find it, then we have to base on whatever limited information we have. And that's where disclosure is crucial. That's where disclosing is important, okay? So some stuff that you should be considering when you're inputting it on the multiple listing service. Some multiple listing services automatically fill in the square footage. It is correct. If you're part of the CRMLS, excuse me, and if you understand how to navigate, then you know that it will automatically fill in that information for you. What it does, it pulls tax assessor's information And that information now is put into the MLS. And it includes really the square footage. It includes the address. It includes the year it was built, and it also includes the lot size. Now, the importance is, what is the information coming from? And then how, as consumers and as professionals, do we cover all bases? Because we don't want to be pinned or pointed fingers, right? Well, Simon from Keller Williams says that the property is 3,800, when in essence it's only it's only 2,000 square feet. So you have to understand where you're getting this information. Where is this data coming from? Some of the information, and a lot of it, comes from disclaimers as well. Like, this information is deemed reliable but not guaranteed. You should always have some type of language that ultimately doesn't indicate that this is the only resources that we were able to get this information. At the end of the day, it's the responsibility of everyone, and more so the buyer that's buying the property, because the buyer is the one that's going to be living in the property. The buyer is going to be making the mortgage payment. So the buyer should do any and all due diligence to make sure that they're completely satisfied with the overall condition of the home, including square footage, lot size, and boundaries. This information may not be adequate. One, the sources of material is not identified. There is a failure to indicate that the information has not been verified. So here's an illustration on the right side. It's a property that's a 2-story home, 3-car garage. It's a 4-bedroom, 2-bath. Lot size is 2,460. Okay, the square footage of the property is 1,140. And then here's an example of that information, what we call disclaimer. The information contained herein has been obtained through sources deemed reliable. What is reliable? Seller may be reliable, appraisal may be reliable, tax assessors may be reliable, multiple listings, property profile, title companies may be reliable. So the reason we put this information is that, so the consumer understands that this information may or may not be accurate, and the consumer doesn't come back and want to sue us for inaccurate information. Okay, hope that kind of makes sense. All right, let's continue. Sample MLS disclaimer, likely insufficient MLS disclaimer. The source of material is not identified. Failure to indicate this information has not been verified. So looking at the illustration on the right, this property is 659,900. It's a 5-bedroom, 3-bath. Lot size is 3,950. Square footage is 1,360. And the information contained herein has been obtained through sources deemed reliable, not guaranteed as to its accuracy. Okay, that's another prime example of what we call disclaimer. This is a great disclaimer. There's no guarantee. Excuse me. Anyone that tells you I guarantee it, I would be very, very cautious about it. I would not want to put myself in a liability, because that's like a guaranteed promise. I promise I can sell your home for $5 million when in essence the value of the property is only $3 million, but I guarantee. Okay, now you're putting yourself in a liability, and that can be also when it comes to square footage, lot size, and boundaries. So here's an example of a property sheet. For sale price is $799,900. Address is 123 ABC Street in the city of Los Angeles, right? It's a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 3,982 square feet on a 1,398 lot size. This home was built in the early 90s. It was listed at, December 6, 2021. The ID is SB 123755, right? That's the MLS information. And here's a little bit of descriptions about the property. It's a beautiful, spacious California home, new paint, carpet, and tile. Okay, so it provides you with the level of description when it comes to the MLS, right? Now, missing disclaimers that information has not been verified in the remarks. Disclaimers may be sufficient to avoid what we call liability, okay? Best practice requires both identification of the information sources. Where did you get this information? And then disclaimer that the agent has not verified this information. If you don't verify, right, you might not have gone to the city, right, the city of Los Angeles to verify, and you have something to provide you with the necessary information, then you want to disclose that, you know, the agent has not verified this, and for the buyer and the buyer's agent to do their due diligence. Go and investigate, go get the information that you need in order for you to satisfy yourself to the overall condition of the property. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's look at the remarks here. Excuse me, I'm just battling this slight cough, and I'm just having issues trying to speak and not cough so much. Information above obtained for sources, building, and safety disclaimers. The information contained herein has been obtained through the sources deemed reliable, but not guaranteed as to its accuracy. Any information of a special interest should be obtained through independent verification. Basically, go and find out for yourself, Mr. Buyer. You are buying this property. You should go and identify to see if you got what you need and you're completely satisfied, because there is conditions that you have to meet. And those conditions is releasing contingencies. And if you don't release the contingencies because you're uncertain of the square footage, lot size, or boundaries, then you need to do an extension of that contingency to be released or back out of the deal. That's simple. That's simple. And if the buyer is not doing their due diligence on a timely manner, and what is that time frame? 17 days, right? 17 days to do an inspections, get as many inspectors out there, general contractor, plumber, electrical, roof, whatever that may look like, or whatever you choose or your client chooses, you must do it within a time frame. Because at the end, the buyer will have to release this as a condition or decide to back out of the deal. Now, the whole purpose of today's lecture is just so you have an understanding. That's it, an understanding the pros and cons and what you must do as a professional to protect yourself from a potential liability. You do not want to be that agent is, well, Simon said that the accuracy of this property is 3,500. I'm not an expert in that line of work. I'm not measuring the property. I don't know what I can incorporate, right? I rely on other sources. This is the reason, ladies and gentlemen, you have to have an understanding of how to navigate your approach, your position, and ultimately to avoid a potential liability. Additional remarks. So here's an example illustration of additional remarks. Remember, any source that you get, document it, disclose it. Well, Simon, I don't want to disclose this report that says that the house is falling apart, you know, because this investor wanted to buy it at the lowest possible point. Is that something that I have to present to the new buyer? The answer is yes. Okay, the answer is yes. Now, at the end of the day, the seller does not, and I repeat, does not have to sell the property to anyone if it doesn't hit the price point. So there is protection from both sides. So I want you to understand that it's not just, you know, the buyer's position. The seller has also some wiggle room to negotiate and stay stern in their position. But at the end, it's what we call the dance, right? There has to be a dance between the buyer and the seller. And that dance should have that flow because there's understanding, compromise, but ultimately they want to close the deal. The buyer wants to buy the property, the seller wants to sell the property. If the motivation is there, then it's going to happen. Your job and your role and position is to navigate that conversation, navigate that process, navigate that transaction to the finish line. Close the deal, right? Do we get paid in the beginning of the transaction? Do we get paid during the transaction? No, we are one of the last people that get compensated. The deal closes and it may still be a couple of days before you get paid. So that's the pros and cons. Now the square footage and estimates. 3876 is the tax assessor. 3976 is the seller's lender appraisal. What do you think might have happened there? An oversight, right? The appraisal might have seen 3876, but in writing, he might have gotten distracted. He or she might have got distracted, picked up the phone, was talking as he was doing the report, he or she doing the report, and thought in his head, in her head, I put in 3876. But realizes that it wasn't 3876, it was 3976. But the seller says, hey, wait a minute. No, my property is 4,000. That's what I bought it. The seller at the time told me the house was 4,000 because he added this additional bedroom or added this additional game room. And this is why it's a 4,000 square feet. So, and then also as an illustration, the lot size estimated, right? The lot size may say that the tax assessor says 1321, but the seller says, no, my lot is 1,500. What do you do? What do you put? Well, if there is more than one estimate available, all estimates should be disclosed. So all three of these square footage should be disclosed. You're going to disclose that the tax assessor says 3876. You're going to disclose that the seller's lender appraisal said 3976. You're going to disclose that the seller said is 4,000. Why do you think you're doing this? Because you're trying to protect yourself. Because any of those can be wrong, or all of them can be wrong. You see where I'm going with this? Let the buyer do their own investigation and their due diligence. If they're happy with the property and they can care less about a discrepancy of 100 square feet, then they're going to release this as a condition, excuse me, and they're going to continue with the process. That's simple. But as listing agents, our job and our responsibility is to disclose all estimates that are brought to our attention. Why? Because we are protecting ourselves from liability. Provide disclosures in the remark section of the MLS or advertise it in a separate addendum, okay? So part of the disclosure period, there's a form that I'm going to share with you. And you can put all this information, that's part of your zip forms. That's what's so awesome about this contract. It provides you with that layer of protection to disclose material facts regarding the subject property. All I'm doing is disclosing. Remember when you were going through real estate school, right? They would always talk about location, location, location. Then you get into real estate and now it's about disclosures, disclosures, disclosures. And it's so true. This is the number one reason there's a lot of lawsuits. It's because of disclosure material facts, not disclosing any additional pertinent information regarding the subject property. So I just want you to really think about your role. Seller providing estimates. Ask the seller if they have any documentation to support any estimate of square footage. Let's just say, for example, 5 years earlier, they had a contractor that added an additional bedroom. But something happened that the contractor failed to provide the necessary documents or failed to file the information with the city or county. But the seller says, I have the documentation that can validate and prove that the additional square footage was permitted, and I have the documentation to say, here it is. So any information as a listing agent, when there's some doubt or uncertainty, ask the seller, well, provide me with resources or information that can validate our role and our position. That way I can provide this information to the buyer, so the buyer can now decide, yay, I want this property. Because there's buyers that are very specific. They want a property that is 5,000 square feet. And if the square footage says 4,999 and it's only missing 1 square feet, the buyer may decide not to buy it because they're looking for a 5,000. But the seller says, look, I have the information that validates that. Here is the paperwork from the contractor. You want to provide that is here, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, here's the information that I got straight from the seller that indicates that the property was extended for a 5,000 square feet. Now, if the buyer still needs more information or is uncertain that that's accurate, then let the buyer go and get an appraisal done, okay? Let the buyer go and have someone that can measure the property to determine if it is, the 5,000 that he is seeking. Disclose the information was provided by the seller and it has not been verified, okay? So even if the seller says, here, I have the information from the contractor, do you take that as guaranteed? No, because the contractor or anyone else might have made an error on that. Now, I know it's a little convoluted. I don't want to confuse you, and I don't want you to think you got to get paranoid with this, okay? At the end of the day, do not be afraid of contracts. Don't be afraid. And if you're gonna accidentally make an error, it's an accidental error. It was a mistake. I'll be the first to tell you I've done numerous mistakes, okay? But you want to also be efficient and double check, triple check, quadruple check your information before it gets sent out, okay? Advising the buyer. Caution the buyer against relying only on the information in public records. It may be incomplete or wrong. It's so true. You know how many times I've looked at the tax assessment, the property profiles, the title reports, the seller's information, contractors, renderings, blueprints, and it's still wrong. There might be a chain of mistakes that alter from beginning to end. Let the buyer make their own representation if they want to continue or not. Because at the end of the day, it's the buyer's responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, to be completely satisfied with the overall condition of the home. And if not, that's okay. You can't force the buyer to buy the property because the buyer believes that the property is 4,000, but in essence, it's only 3,800. The buyer can back out. It's inaccurate information. You can't force a buyer to buy, okay? So just keep that in mind when doing your due diligence. If the buyer desires certain sized lot, advise the buyer to obtain an appraisal. The appraisal can be done. The appraisal goes and literally measures. They have a tape measure, right? And they measure from corner to corner and then utilize that as their square footage of the property. And if you want to get a lot size, then you can get a surveyor out there to do an estimate of the lot size, as well. You want to obtain an independent appraisal may provide additional protection in case that the lenders appraised value is not accurate. So yeah, there's so many different resources, team, that you don't have to just rely on this. You can ask the buyer, go and get your own appraisal done, and determine, especially if it's a cash deal. You want to know that it's an accurate information before you're willing to release the funds or willing to close the deal. Because once the deal is closed, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. The deal is done, it closes, and if the buyer wasn't happy, then the buyer may lose out on this, or the buyer may come back and want to sue. Advising the buyers if buyers require a particular square footage or lot size and does not obtain an independent appraisal. Advise the buyer in writing of the risk relying on public records, estimates from others, and especially from the sellers. What does the seller want? The seller wants to sell the property for the highest price point with the least amount of headaches to net them the most, right? That's easy. Who wouldn't be, as a consumer, as a seller, want to, get the most out of your house, right? The higher the price, the least amount of headaches, the more of a net that they're going to get. It's a win for the seller. But also you have to understand the importance and the responsibility of you and your client if you represent the buyer. That advising the buyer, the risk factors that sometimes the sellers have inaccurate information. They may sell you, yeah, you know what? I bought this from the seller bought it from the previous seller, and the seller bought it from that seller. And it could be a chain of events that everyone convinced that the lot or the square footage of the property is 5,000. But in essence, until you came in, you actually were the only one in 20 years that got someone to go measure the property, a surveyor, an appraiser. And now you realize that the square footage is inaccurate. So for 20 years, everyone relied on the seller's direction, when in essence it was inaccurate information. But you don't want to be that agent that is ultimately caught. And because you didn't put some type of disclaimer, now the buyer and the buyer's agents are seeking damages, are seeking, a potential lawsuit. So I caution you. That's where the seller's disclosures come into play. Agents do and don'ts. Do not identify boundary lines or markers. Okay, don't be that agent. Well, I see a marker here. I'm assuming that this is the property line. I'm assuming that the wall that is on the east side of the house and then on the west side and the north side of the house must be the boundary lines. You cannot, and I repeat, you cannot identify that information is correct. How many times have sellers encroached in other sellers, how many times has owners encroached in other owners' property? I'll be the first, I've seen it more often than none, where they incorrectly put the boundary lines into your property's, your neighbor's property, and it's an encroachment. What should be a 6,000 lot size, because of the encroachment, now your property line measures 55. You just lost 500 square feet because the knucklehead that installed the wall did not get the proper measurements, did not get the proper information, and ultimately crossed into your property and now is using your property as extra square footage on the lot. So you cannot rely heavily on the seller. The do's. Recommend that the buyer hire an engineer or surveyor to identify the boundaries or monument markers. While title companies will plot out the boundaries of an easement upon request, they do not do so for property boundaries. Okay. Now, in respect to septic inspections, well inspections, property monuments, and allocation of cost addendum to the cost of the inspections, these are more like properties in the Big Bear area or the high desert where they're not connected to the city, you have to also understand the importance when you're buying a property that does have a septic tank. Where is it located? Is it on the side of the house? Is it on the back of the house? Is it on a angle of the property? But there's inspections, there's cleanouts, and there's repairs. What if this septic tank is 30 years old and now needs some repairs? So think about that as well, the importance of identifying and providing the necessary documents. Now, this is a form that is straight from the zip forms, the SWPI form. Well, let's talk a little bit about easement and considerations. What's the inspection contingent time frame, right? Which is very, very, very important. For example, an extent of a recorded easement, direct buyer to title company or a lawyer. Easement issues often involve access to the property, a shared driveway, whether it includes access only or right to a parking. That's very important. And a lot of this information will be provided by the number one resource, the seller. The seller will be the one telling you, yeah, we have an alleyway in the back. Everyone has the opportunity to share that alleyway. And that alleyway is public usage. So anyone can go into it. Now, if there's a sign that says it's only for the residents because there's no exit, it leads to the back of the garage, the back of the backyard, or it provides you, maybe if it's a duplex, right? You have a house in the front and a house in the back, but the front house has a fence that does not allow you to go to the back, but this alleyway easement allows access to the back property. I'll be the first to admit, I remember owning a property in the city of La Habra that I lived, it was adjacent to an alley. It was public. People would cut from one street to the other to take the shortcut. Otherwise, it would have to go to the end of the road, go zigzag, and then eventually pop out on the other side, where the alley where the home was a straight shot to the opposing highway. So, but it also would lead to the back of my home as well. So I had access on both sides of the house. I had access on the alleyway on the left side of the house, but I also had access in the back. So I had points of entry from the main entrance of the house, the front, side to side. Also, because I lived on the side of an alley, I had access to the side of the house. And then on the back where the property in the garage, in the backyard, and the little house I had a driveway parking for anyone that was renting the back unit. So that's again where the easements. Now the information may be that it is an easement that was done correctly, or it may not be an easement that was done correctly. Maybe the kids throughout the years started taking shortcuts to the school, but used someone's property in order to get to their school faster. And I remember as a kid, that's how we did it. We would jump the fence in the back, cut through the owner's back yard. It was a big field, and then it would give us a shortcut instead of going all the way around. That would take us more time to get to the school. We would just cut right through the back. Now, was that considered an easement? The answer is no. Just because I utilized that for years and years, and most of the kids use it as a shortcut, was not considered an easement. It has to be created by the city, the state, or the county, and also the seller to provide that easement. It's like an easement of a driveway, right? You have two properties, right? You don't have a fence, but you want to open it up, but also include where the easement allows and it intertwines where other vehicles can park there for more usage. As long as both consumers, the sellers, allow it, then you can create an easement to allow larger spaces. All right. Additional resources, square footage. I'm going to share this quick little video. I think I still have it. Bear with me here. Any questions regarding square footage? All right, let me share this one real quick.
Every seller who puts a property on the market wants to show it in the best light possible. Sellers, however, must be careful not to cross the line between puffing and misinterpretation. Buyers particularly want to know the square footage of the house and the land it sits on, and where the seller's property ends and the neighbor's property begins. This information can come from many sources. For square footage, the county assessor determines a value that is used for property tax purposes. A local government permit agency may have a value that is used for determining what construction has taken place or may take place. If you used a loan to purchase the property, your original lender may have had an appraiser identify a value to satisfy the lender's underwriting concerns. If you refinance the property, the same thing could have happened. And if you did any remodeling, the contractor or architect may have established their own value. As for property boundaries, the information may have come from a previous seller, a title company, a next-door neighbor, or even a surveyor. Sellers should be careful to express facts and avoid speculation. If asked, for example, the seller should say, "I have a copy of the lender's appraisal that states the house is this many square feet," or "the county assessor's statement shows the land is this many square feet," or even "I enclose the patio with or without a permit," as the case may be. The seller should never say, "The property is this many square feet." Regarding boundaries, unless the seller had a survey done, the seller should never identify fences, hedges, or walls as being the true boundary line. Instead, the seller may say, "I have maintained the lawn up to the fence," or "my sprinklers water the hedges on the east side of the property," or "I replaced the broken slats on the fence." Even if the seller has had a survey, the seller should be like the host of Family Feud and simply say, "Survey says," and then provide a copy to the buyer. It is always better to attribute the information to an outside source and provide backup documentation than it is to be held legally responsible for making a claim as if you are the authoritative source. One last thing, if you, the seller, have more than one source, provide them all. Don't pick and choose only the figures that make your property look larger than it really is.
Okay, one more video, guys.
Obtaining accurate information about a property you are about to buy can be challenging. If it is important to you to know the precise square footage, you should hire a professional, such as an appraiser. Don't rely on representations from others, such as the county assessor, permit agency, prior lenders, or even the seller or your current lender. Their figures may be based on inaccurate or outdated information or estimates. It is important that you verify any information from an outside source with current information. Another factor that most people consider important when thinking about square footage is the price per square foot. This figure depends on many factors. An aggregate average you may receive from a list of recent sales or a website often will not consider numerous factors important to you or the seller, such as location, time on market, other properties available at the time, and added features such as a pool, spa, solar, and landscaping. For example, the same 1,500 square foot home in Bakersfield will be valued differently than the exact same house in Newport Beach. A house near public transportation may be valued differently from one miles away from the nearest bus, train, or metro. A third floor condo facing the pool may be valued differently from the same floor plan on the first floor facing the street. A 1,500 square foot house built 5 years ago may be valued differently than one built in the 1950s. Averages or aggregated numbers may not make such distinctions. Remember that just because you value the house at so much per square foot, the property may still be worth the same on the open market as what you paid for it, even if the actual number of square feet turns out to be less than the representation. Finally, be sure to discuss your concerns with your realtor and independently verify representations of others. While square footage may be important to you, it is not the only consideration. Size does matter, but it's not the only thing that does.
Cool. Any questions? I know there was a question, and let me just show you this other one, navigating square footage guide for buyers and sellers. Again, most of the information that I gather is straight from the California Association of Realtors. Here's, some of the, pros and cons, but understanding, the do's and don'ts. What buyers need to know, what sellers need to know, okay? Straightforward, gives you answers and gives you questions and answers to a lot of the questions that you may have as a professional. And you may not have the answer, you may not know. The good thing is you have the resources to do so. Okay, so keep that in mind. On top of all that, I know there was a question regarding, explaining the square footage on notes. So the MLS will often say that it's 1,000, and then it'll have an A or a P. So the A stands for assessors. Okay, the A is assessors, meaning it's from the tax roll. They were provided that information straight from the tax roll, the assessors. The P is strictly from personal information, that this might have been from the consumer, the seller. Personal information was gathered from that. So those are the explanation, Charles, regarding the position. So I hope that kind of answers your question. All right, team. Any questions regarding square footage, lot size, and boundaries? Any feedback? I hope it kind of gave you some clarity and understanding. Most of the information, again, is just disclosing, right? If you get different numbers, put them all. I got it from the seller, I got it from the assessors, I got it from the contractor, I saw it on a report. Here's where I got this information. Simple. That'll protect you from a potential liability down the line when it comes up, realizing, hey, you know what, the square footage is not accurate. Well, as an agent, they're gonna subpoena you. You're gonna have to provide documentation. You may have to testify. Well, in my position, the information I gather was from the seller, who the seller indicated to me got it from the contractor. And here's a copy of that estimate or report that showed that the square footage was this amount. Okay. So, it's just, again, a layer of ways of disclosing square footage. Now, let me show you the actual form. Can you see my screen? Oh, probably not. One momentos. Let me share my screen real quick. There's actually a form that you can provide. Let's see if do you see my zip forms? Can I get a yes?
No, we don't. I don't.
You
see
don't-
the zip forms,
You
no.
don't see my zip form?
No, I see the quick guide navigating square footage.
Okay, thank you. Let me see now. Now do you see it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, here's the form, guys. It's the form SFLS, Square Footage Lot Size Disclosure Advisory. This is the form that if your TC is not utilizing, I highly recommend to include it as part of the process and documentation. It's just an added disclosure. Very simple. All you're going to do is put the subject property, right? The address is 123 ABC Street, right? As an example, it's going to be in the city of Torrance. Okay. State of California 90505. All right, there it is. That's simple. Now, there's 4 disclaimers, different sources of square footage. So what it does, this form protects you as a consumer, and it protects, it protects the consumer and it protects you as the professional as well. Measurements of structure. One second here. Okay, so the different sources of square footage measurements, measurement of structure vary from source to source. And the data the information, there is one official size source or a standard method of calculations. So it provides you with a concise information, property lot size, the dimensions and configurations and boundaries, folks. Fences, hinges, walls, retaining walls, and other barriers or markers may not be corresponding with the legal defined property boundaries. So what it says to the buyer, the consumer, hey, we are providing you that the lot size, the square footage, but it may not be accurate. But Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, do your due diligence, do your research, and then ultimately, satisfy yourself with the overall condition. And if you're not satisfied, you don't have to buy the property, you back out of the deal. Well, you know what, the lot size says 10,000, but in essence, after doing a surveyor and getting the boundaries, it's really only 8,500. We don't want to buy the property because my intention is I need a lot size of 10,000. So the buyer within their due diligence period, folks, okay, that's where the 17 days. And even if you need more time, you can ask the listing agent and the seller for an extension of that time to release that because you need to get more information. And a seller and a listing agent will understand if there's inaccuracy, why wouldn't you allow the buyer to do more investigation? I would. What am I doing? I'm protecting myself from a potential liability because we put the pressure on the buyer to release this. They buy, they close, and now they get all these tests done, realize, now the intent was very clear that the seller was forcing us to close fast because there was errors on the lot size. So there's many variables that can occur. But one thing is the broker obligations. Brokers and agents do not have the expertise. We're not experts in all this. So why would we start providing this information as we are the experts on it? We're not. Our job is just to sell and help the buyers buy. That's it. All the other stuff, they have to get legal representation and decide what direction they want to go. Now, the cool thing about this form is also the disclosure and measurements and sources, which is the square footage and lot size. So here's the cool thing about public records. If there is public records and the public record says 1546, right? And the lot size says 7,500, you're going to put that with the public record. Any additional information, this information was from public record, was from the tax assessors or whatever that may be. Maybe you did a little bit of history and this property had gone into escrow closed or an expired listing or a cancel, and you end up retaining that information, or excuse me, you retain the new listing on it. And now you saw that there was a discrepancy from the previous listing agent, and the listing agent might have put it at 1550, and the lot size might have been 7,600. Okay, and then you're going to say that this information was from the MLS ID number, blah 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 blah. Remember, the more you disclose, the better position, because now the buyer cannot come after you for non-disclosure, folks. Okay, if the seller got a copy of the appraisal, then put that the square footage on the appraisal 1 and the lot size is this, and appraisal 2, if it fell out more and the seller got a copy, or the listing agent, you want to cover all areas. Okay, condominiums, architectural drawings, floor plans, surveyors, and other stuff. And then you have the seller sign and the buyer confirming. And the beauty is that it says right here, by signing below, buyer acknowledged that the buyer has read, understood, and received a copy of this form. Buyers encouraged, right, to read it carefully. If no information is provided or any of this measurements or materials to the buyer, it's strongly advised to investigate, the property's accuracy of existence of the measurements provided herein, or otherwise, if buyer does not do so, the buyer is acting against the advice of the broker and the agent. Okay, so it's protecting you, it's protecting the buyers, protecting the seller, and it's protecting the listing agent in the companies as well, because it already clearly states that the buyer has to do their investigations. Once you release that contingency, then what you're telling the seller and the listing agent that you understand, you have read, and you have confirmed and satisfied yourself to the overall condition of the property. That's it. That's simple. Okay. So any additional questions regarding any of the material that I provided you on the presentation, the video, and obviously the form that is necessary to, align yourself as part of the disclosure process.
Hello, Simon. This is Jerry. I have one question.
Yes, Jerry.
Okay, so for the form that you just showed us, so do you recommend that we use this as a standard form in any transactions, or just
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, any transactions involving, residential, 1, 2, 3, 4 units, even commercial, I would say utilize this because this is not just attached to SFRs, duplex, triplex, or fourplex. This can also be multi-unit properties as well, buildings, commercials, retails. Heck, I would also use this for vacant land as well. You got 1 acre property, and it says it's 42,500, but then there's something else that says, no, this is a acre and a half. So where did you get this information? Well, this information came from the tax assessor, but this information came from the seller. Disclose it. Let the buyer do their due diligence. And if it's in the middle and the buyer's okay, then the buyer moves forward with the closing, releases this as a condition, and now it protects yourself in case that the buyer comes back. Well, you didn't tell me that this lot was an acre instead of an acre and a half. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you released that as part of the contingency period. And more so, we provided you with this addendum that clearly says that the resources that we got was from multiple different parties. And that's what we disclosed, what we knew. At the end, you didn't have to buy the property. At the end, you didn't have to release the contingency. You could have done additional inspections to satisfy yourself with the overall condition. That's simple. Okay.
And
Any other questions? Good question,
So
Jerry.
who-
Thank you.
Yeah. So who do you think who should initiate this form? Is it seller agent or buyer agent?
Either or, either or. Mostly it'll come from the listing agent because the listing agent is the one inputting it on the multiple listing service. So the listing agent is already doing some research on the data. They're going through realist, tax assessors, or maybe they have a copy of an appraisal and they are identifying the square footage and lot size of the property. So that's where it usually comes from, the seller. But let's just say that the listing agent is not proactive, then you want to make sure that you protect yourself because remember, you represent the buyer. The buyer can come back and say, well, Simon, or well, Jerry, you didn't really protect me and really take care of my best interest. It was your job. You're a professional. Why did you allow me to buy this property when this lot size is a lot smaller than what I thought it was? You provided me with an MLS at the listing agent, and now you can be entangled in a liability. Because remember, it bounces from one and the other. Your job is to protect your client's best interest. Did you protect your client's best interest because you were not sure, didn't understand the process, did not know what disclosure, or you just bluntly didn't know? This is why these classes, educational platforms are important, because this is an eye-opener to forms that some agents don't use. This is a form that it's very far and few use, but I'm just protecting you to add that as part of the arsenal and part of the transaction and file, because at the end, 5-10 years from now, if this agent wants, this consumer wants to come back and now subpoena or sue us, we have to backtrack and make sure that what documentation did we provide as part of the process. Again, I'm not here to scare you, okay? That's not the intention, but I'm here to educate you to understand the elements that can transpire, because anyone at any given time can want to put a claim in a lawsuit, and it's time consuming, it's frustrating, and at the end it can cost money as well. Okay. So with that, any additional questions? No other questions? You guys are easy. You're super, super easy. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead on the chat. If you have any additional questions, please send me an email. It's Simon Cazares at kaw.com. Okay, there's my email. And again, always, if you're not part of the South Bay office, speak with your broker and ask guidance with your broker on the importance of square footage, lot size, and boundaries. Okay, it's 3 o'clock, guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you all. I'll see you on our next contract class. See you. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Hope.